Hello and welcome back to the channel. And tonight I'm out here at the farm under a beautiful night sky. And the reason we're here is, now you may have heard recently that I've purchased a Sony A7S3 camera. Now I got that camera primarily for video production. And in fact, that's what I'm using right now to capture this footage. But I also bought the Sony 20mm f1.8 lens, and what I thought I would do is a comparison between the Sony system and the Nikon system, the Z6 with the Nikon 20mm f1.8 S lens. So I've come out here tonight to have a look at these two cameras side by side, and in fact what I'm going to do is shoot the exact same compositions, same lighting, same scenes, and I'm going to use the same camera settings, and we're going to go away and have a bit of a look at that. So I'll take the images back home, process them, and when we get back home we'll have a bit more of a discussion about this camera and lens and how I feel it compares with the Nikon system. Things like handling and ergonomics and all of that sort of thing will come into it. So let's get started. Now, seeing as we're here in front of this old shed, that's going to be our first composition. So I'm going to set my cameras up just over here, Milky Way core over the top of the shed. It looks magnificent out here tonight. I'll see if I can get it in a single shot, but if I can't, I'll just do maybe a 2 or 3 shot panorama and compare the results. So let's get started. So you can see here I've got each camera sitting on its own separate tripod, but very close together. My aim, of course, is to get the same composition, and I want, as much as I can, identical images. So I've got the same f-stop, same shutter speed, same ISO, same white balance. Now, the first thing that I'm noticing when I'm taking these images is that the color from the back screen of the Sony is completely different to the back screen of the Nikon. Now, I've noticed this before. You know, different camera brands, Canon, Fuji, they're all different. They all look different color science, and that's okay. I'll check that out, because the other thing is that the Sony screen is a whole lot brighter than the Nikon screen, but that doesn't mean it's a brighter image. It just means the screen is brighter. I can see a lot more detail in the shadow areas, in the darker areas on the Sony screen, so that could indicate that it's picking up more. It's a very light sensitive camera, so it's quite possibly picking up more of that dark areas, but I won't know until I get it into Lightroom, and I'll have a real good look at both of them. Now, you'll notice here on the tripods I've got remote triggers, and what I've done, I've hooked them up to both cameras, and I'm using my remote in my pocket here, the one I always use, the Yongnuo RF603. All I've got to do is press the button on this and it fires both cameras at the same time. I don't have to touch them at all, which is great because I can be off doing some light painting or something like that, which is what I always do with my Nikon camera. So I've just found a Sony cable. I can tell you what, these Sony cables are really hard to find. One thing I've noticed about Sony stuff is there's Nikon and Canon stuff out there by the truckloads, but Sony little gadgets and cables and intervalometers and things like that, much harder to find, at least here in Australia. But anyway, it's going really well. So I've shot a number of compositions, and just looking at them on the screen, I think I've got my compositions the same, but as I said, the brightness levels are different. But anyway, I'll continue on. Now, I know this is going to be difficult to see on the back of the screen, but yeah, the Sonys are definitely a different color, which is interesting. But nevertheless, so after shooting at the shed up there, I came down here to the shearing shed, so another shed, but I wanted to do some lighting here with some low-level lights. Now, I also use low-level light up there, but this is a little bit more tricky because it's a bigger area, there's trees and so forth, but you can see how I've got that lit at the moment. Now, that's just using a couple of lights, a little bit brighter than what I had for the actual exposures, but that's how I'm doing this shot here. I've got light over there behind the tree, another one down here which is shining on the shed itself, giving a little bit of side backlight, and of course nothing from the front. Now, this is the lights I'm using, and I actually did use the orange gel just to warm this scene up a little bit. So all of these lights are on a little bit warmer color temperature, As you know, I love to use these Z96s, and I had about 3 of them around here, and yeah, pretty happy with how they came up. Now, so far I've been using low-level lighting, and I've just been using infinity focus for all of these compositions. But now I'm going to move on to some other types of compositions where I stack, yes, the background for noise reduction, but then I'm going to refocus onto the foreground and do my light painting technique that I do quite often. So lowering the ISO, dropping down the aperture a little bit. And I'm going to be shooting the old truck up in the paddock and the old Austin A30. It's an old favourite of mine, so why not go back to something that I'm pretty familiar with, and we'll see how these cameras compare on that type of photography. The flip screen is one of the features that I love so much about this camera, and it's one of the 2 major reasons I chose this camera for my video production. I really need a flip screen that'll come around to the side and the front, but it does have some added benefits when shooting nightscapes or any still images for that matter. When I flip my camera up into portrait mode, I can then flip the screen as well, so I don't have to bend my neck, which is what I've been doing with the Z6. Now, as much as I love the Z6 screen because it tilts down and up, it doesn't tilt out sideways. So when I stick it in portrait, it's a lot more difficult to get down, especially when you've got your tripod down low to the ground, which I often do. Now, of course, I'm used to the Nikon screen here with all the button layouts and the tilt screen at the back. Now, when I go to the Sony, because it's got a flip screen that comes out to the side, and the flip screen is awesome, but in the dark, when I'm fiddling around for the buttons, I'm sort of over here somewhere because I'm used to having the screen in the center. So I've got to get used to the buttons being down here and wherever they are. I mean, the button layout's okay, don't get me wrong, it's just that it's different. And in the dark, I mean, I could probably just flip the screen in like that and use it that way, which would probably work. It's not necessarily the way that I would want to do it. And so, as you can probably see behind me there, the Milky Way core has just about lowered down to the horizon. And I'm finished shooting for the night. Now, I'm pretty pleased about that. I'm happy with the shots that I've captured tonight at all these different spots here on the farm. It's actually getting pretty chilly, which it does at this time of year. It's well into springtime, but after midnight, which it is right now, it still gets pretty cold. But it's still an absolutely gorgeous night. Anyway, what we're going to do now is head back home. We're going to get these into the computer and check out the differences between the cameras, and I'll talk a little bit more about ergonomics and stuff like that. So I'll see you back in the studio. So back here in the studio, and I want to just talk a little bit about my mindset for changing cameras and adding this camera into my arsenal. Now, of course, if you've been following me for a while, you'd know that I shoot my video on this channel with the Panasonic G9. Now, the Panasonic G9, which is actually filming this right now, has been a pretty fantastic camera, to be honest, but there are 2 features of that camera that I was always a little bit frustrated with, and I've been sort of looking to upgrade that camera for quite a while now. Now, I was actually waiting for Nikon to come up with a full frame camera like the Z6 that had a fully articulating screen. They still haven't brought one out. And when Sony brought out the A7S3 and it had that fully articulating screen, my interest was immediately piqued with that camera. But the two features, before we get to that the Panasonic struggled in, one was autofocus. Now, any of you who have ever used Panasonic cameras for video work, whether it's the G9 or the GH5 or any of the G series, you'll know that the autofocus is flaky at best. Now, I know they've improved it in recent times with firmware updates, but it's still nowhere near as good as the competition. The other thing, of course, is low light video ability. Now, most of my videos are shot in the middle of the night with very little light around, and for those shots, unless I was bringing lighting kits with me, which I do when I'm close to the car, the G9's okay, but I was using the Z6 for the really low light situations, and it was okay. But when this Sony A7S3 came out, I thought this is the camera that I've been looking for. Now, the autofocus on this thing is absolutely amazing. It just sticks, and it's got that eye autofocus. It sticks to the eye when in video mode. So that is what I was looking for. I can't afford to be shooting all of these videos out there in the field and not have accurate focus. When I get back, I don't want these to be blurry or hunting in and out of focus. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, of course, what the A7S series is renowned for, and that is low light video. It is phenomenal. Now, I did a bit of a test between this camera and the Z6, and of course the A7S blows it away at high ISO. So I can shoot up to, well, I mean, it goes up to 400,000 ISO. I'm not going to shoot that high, but when I was shooting the Z6 at 51,000 ISO, which is within the native limits of the ISO, this thing kills it. It just sees far, far better, much less noise. So they're the two main reasons. Now, of course, I mentioned the flip screen. Now, this camera has a fully articulating flip screen. And so that is also vital for me because I'm a solo shooter. I shoot myself on a tripod. Now, I need to be able to see what I'm doing. Now, a lot of you will say, oh, no, you don't need a flip screen. You just have a wide angle lens and you know where everything is. Now, for some people, that can work, especially in daylight. But remember, I'm in the nighttime. And of course, my style of shooting my videos isn't vlogging style where I have the camera close like this. I tend to like to have the camera on a tripod and I walk around, and so I come into the frame and I come from the side and I come from the back and I walk up to the camera. Now, if you're doing that, it's really hard sometimes to know exactly where you are in the frame. So that flip screen was vital. Now, of course, as I mentioned, Nikon don't have a flip screen in any of their full frame cameras. Certainly not their mirrorless cameras. I love the Z6 for a lot of things, but it doesn't have the flip screen. Now, this is my first Sony Alpha camera. They've had Sony Alpha cameras have been around for a while, and I've been a little bit less than impressed, to be honest, with some of the handling and ergonomics of those cameras. They're a little bit small. Now, this has got a fantastic grip. One of the things I actually love about the Panasonic G9 is the handling of the camera. It just feels fantastic in the hand. And I've also really loved the Nikon. It's got a nice deep grip. I've got fairly long fingers and it just sits nicely in my hand. And so this A7S3 is exactly the same. In fact, I would say all three cameras are so similar in this regard. Now, talking about the screens on these cameras, this screen is not quite as big as the screen on the Z6, and it's even a fraction smaller than the G9. I wish it was bigger. I really appreciate the larger screen on the Z6 here. Now, when I was shooting out in the field and I compared these two cameras, the screen is good quality, don't get me wrong, on this Sony camera, but it's not as big. And of course, my eyes aren't as good as they used to be, and so I appreciate having a larger screen here on the Z6. So if they could have fitted just that tiny little bit more, like I think the new Canon mirrorless cameras, the R5 and the R6, have a larger LCD screen, I think that would have been good. The other thing, and it's only a small thing, but again, I'm talking about video here, the audio level meters on the screen, they're tiny. I find it hard to see. Now, you're going to say to me, oh, who cares what the audio level meters look like? There have been plenty of times when I've shot video and something's gone wrong. Either the microphone wasn't turned on or plugged in, or something was wrong. And just having that little audio going across the bottom of the screen when I'm talking, I know the audio is being recorded onto the camera. Now on the G9, it's got a really prominent little bar down the bottom, which I think is fantastic. This camera's got them, but gee, they're hard to see. Not so bad at night time, but in the daytime, I can't see them at all. So I've got to walk up close to the screen. Oh yeah, it's working, and then walk back again. Look, it's only a small thing. I just wish it was a little bit more prominent. Now, look, as I said, they all feel fantastic in the hand. The other thing that Sony's have been criticised for a lot is the menu layout. Well, this camera has a new menu. Now, I can't really compare it to the old ones because, as I said, I've never had a Sony Alpha camera before, but this is very similar to the Panasonic layout and even the Nikon layout. I didn't have too much trouble just working through the menu system of this camera without ever having played with the camera before. So pretty good with that. I think they've done a fantastic job. The button layout is pretty good as well. I really like the way they've placed all the buttons around the camera. In fact, it reminds me so much of the way that Nikon have done it. I don't know whether they've gone down that track because of the opposition. Who would know? But you know, that's just the way it goes. Now, I purchased 2 lenses with this Sony camera. Firstly, the one that you can see here on it, which is a Sony 20mm f1.8. It's a fairly new lens. It's a G lens. It's not a G master lens. The other one is this one. It's a Tamron 28-75 f2.8. Now, I've heard nothing but good reports about this lens, and having used it for a while now, that's a fantastic lens. And these Tamron E-mount lenses for the Sonys are fantastic. I totally recommend them. They make quite a few different ones. They're really good lenses for both stills and video. The other thing is, these lenses are very competitively priced, and even this Sony 20mm lens is fantastic compared to, say, the 24mm G Master lens, which is, well, it's probably twice the price of this. It's an awesome lens, don't get me wrong, but this is not far behind it, let me tell you. Now, this leads me to my biggest gripe with the Sony A7S3, and I honestly reckon it's way overpriced, at least here in Australia. I mean, this camera, as good as it is, I can buy 2 of these cameras for the price of one of these. I can buy 2 of the Sony A7 Mark III, which is an older model, admittedly, and I can actually buy about 3.5 Panasonic G9s for the price of one of these. Now, I had to sell an arm and a leg and maybe even a kidney to buy this camera, not to mention 4 cameras and an assortment of lenses and various camera gear. So, look, in the end, it didn't end up costing me very much, but I had to get rid of all that other stuff, which thankfully I had, and I didn't have a whole lot of need for all of those things. Okay, so having said all of that, it's a really good camera, and I'm actually really happy with its video performance. Okay, so what about the still images, and in particular, shooting nightscapes? Well, that's where we started this video, so let's continue my comparison with the Nikon Z6. Now, the first thing I've noticed is just how much detail you can see when looking at the live view screen. This thing is absolutely amazing. Now, admittedly, I have the screen brightness on this turned up quite high for my video needs, especially in daytime video. I need to be able to see that screen very clearly. But it does make composition really easy for nightscapes. It's considerably brighter than the screen on the Nikon. And also the fact that it's fully articulating makes all those low down shots, as I said, an absolute breeze. And I noticed recently when I was shooting, that does make a lot of difference. Now, generally, I am actually a big fan of fully articulating screens on cameras, but of course I'm coming from a video production mindset there. One of the great strengths of both of these cameras is how customizable they are regarding the quick function menus and buttons and preferences on the actual body of the camera itself. It's also good to see that Sony has finally caught up with Nikon regarding the ability to have separate settings programmed in for stills and video. Now, this makes it a breeze to quickly shift between the two shooting modes, and it should be on every camera, let me tell you that. How is the Sony A7S3 for still image quality? Well, I actually love the colours straight out of this camera. The JPEGs are absolutely beautiful, just like the Z6. Now you can see from these images on screen, which haven't been edited at all, I reckon they look great. Now, this is one area where it's a lot better than a Panasonic G9. I was never a huge fan of the still images from the G9, but of course I didn't buy that camera for its still image performance either. So when I took the A7S3 and the Z6 out to shoot the Milky Way, I did my usual checklist of things to ensure getting a great image. And you saw me out there. I set them up both exactly the same on the tripods. I set the shutter speed, aperture and ISO all the same. I also set the white balance to manual white balance at 4200 Kelvin. Now, I was aware that the colours may be a little bit different between these cameras because that's what I'd always noticed when comparing different camera brands in the past. I was shooting in RAW file format, so this shouldn't have been a problem anyway. Now, all I had to do was set my cameras into manual focus mode, get infinity focus, and start shooting. Now, this is where I noticed a major difference between these two cameras. Now, on my Z6 and all my previous Nikon cameras, I was always able to enable the live view screen and zoom in on the back, digitally zoom in on a star or whatever else I wanted to focus on and make the required adjustments from there. With the Z6, I can go in about 15 times with that digital zoom. Now, I don't always need to go in that far, but I can if I need to. Now, on the Sony, I was staggered to find that the maximum zoom using the focus assist feature to manually focus is only 4.1 times. That's right, 4.1. In fact, I was so surprised by this that I spent a heap of time Googling the net trying to find out where the hidden menu was to change this. There is no hidden menu. That's it. Only a measly 4 times zoom when manually focusing. I couldn't believe it. During my research, I found that most of the other Sony cameras in the Alpha 7 series could zoom in closer to about 10 times. Now, they varied a little bit depending on the resolution of these cameras, but no, not the A7S3. This fact itself is a telling indicator that this camera is designed first and foremost for video production. Anyway, I got on with the job and found that what I considered sharp focus on the stars, but I'm warning you, be very careful with focus. And you need good eyes with this camera. All right, so I want to show you the results of the shots I took with both cameras out on the farm. Now, our first composition was the old shed, and I shot both single exposures as well as stacked shots to compare these cameras. Of course, the lighting was exactly the same for both cameras. And as you can see, they both look really good. But if I had to choose, I prefer the images from the Z6. They just seem to have a better feel to them. And I also noticed this during the editing of the images. And I reckon this is where the 12 megapixel sensor of the Sony struggles a bit more than the 24 megapixel sensor in the Nikon. And look, hey, this is in no way a scientific test. It's just how I feel about the images whilst I'm working on them. In my testing, I didn't notice any significant light gathering advantage to the A7S3 with still images. The screen's brighter, yes, but I didn't notice it so much looking at the images once I'd taken them. There's no doubt that the rear screen shows the detail on the Sony and more detail, and it's certainly a great help for composition. But as far as the actual RAW files go, they're both very good, and when I viewed them in Lightroom on the large screen, they look great. The shearing shed was the same story. Both excellent images from these two cameras. Now, by the way, I did the exact same processing with each of the files. Firstly, I did some preliminary edits in Lightroom, then exported TIFFs for stacking in Sequator. I always do that. Then I masked and blended the images in Photoshop. That's my standard workflow, and it made no difference which camera system I was using. And that's the story for all the images I shot during the night. There isn't a lot of difference in the results at all. Now, obviously, the 24 megapixel files of the Nikon are larger and have the advantage of being able to print larger than the Sony files. And I actually do a fair amount of printing, so this is an important factor to me. For posting on websites or Facebook or whatever like that, the Sony files are plenty big enough, and that's for sure. The other thing I was really interested to try out was the Sony 20mm lens, this one here. Now, in a nutshell, this lens is absolutely awesome. It's small, it's lightweight, and extremely sharp, even wide open at f1.8. And I'd say it's an excellent companion to any of the Sony Alpha lineup of cameras if you want to shoot the stars. Now, as you know, I really love the Nikon 20mm f1.8. Well, look, if you have a look at them, the Sony 20mm is every bit as good, but it's a much smaller package. Now, I already love the 20mm focal length for shooting nightscapes, and this Sony lens certainly cemented my opinion on that front, that's for sure. Look, if you want to watch a really good review of this Sony lens, head over to Alan Wallace's channel, where he compares it to the equally awesome Sony 24mm f1.4 G Master lens, the one I mentioned before. And that's worth having a look at. So I'd like to give you my final opinion on these two camera systems. In a nutshell, they're both very impressive. The Sony is the clear winner when it comes to video performance. And that's not to say that the Z6 isn't a great video camera, but for me, the versatility of the fully articulating screen, the incredible eye autofocus in video mode, and the amazing low light and high ISO performance put the A7S3 in a class above. Now, as far as shooting stills and particularly nightscapes and Milky Way shots, I'd say the clear winner between these two cameras is the Z6. I absolutely love this camera. It's done everything I've ever asked of it, and probably more. It's common knowledge that Nikon uses Sony sensors in the majority of their cameras, and I can see certain similarities, I guess, in both the files and the images and the way that they edit and the dynamic range and all of those sorts of things. As you know, I'm also a huge fan of the Nikon 1.8 primes, and I've got three of them. I've got the 20, the 35 and the 50, and I find them all absolutely fantastic. Now, regarding the A7S3, I love the form factor. It's nice and small, especially with this 20mm lens. It handles fantastically, handles like a dream. All the buttons are in the right place. You can program everything to your heart's content, and it's very reliable. It's a tough, solid camera. The fully articulating screen, as I've mentioned many times, is awesome. I just wish it was a little bit bigger, a bit more like the Z6. The video autofocus is breathtaking, especially coming from Panasonic cameras. Now, I think one of the things that could be interesting to some of you is just to get an idea of the different weight of these. So I'm going to do my standard weight test. I'll get my kitchen scales up here, as you can see. There we go. Start with the Sony. So I'll stick it, that's with the 20mm lens, Sony A7S3. It's just under 1200 grams. So that's 1.2 kilograms, just under. All right, let's try the Nikon, again with the 20mm f1.8. Stick it on the scales, just over 1.3, so it's about 100 grams heavier. That probably makes sense when you look at the difference in size between these two lenses. The camera bodies themselves, I think, are pretty much the same. All right, I know you're interested in that. Both the Sony 20mm and the Tamron 28-75 are awesome lenses and really quite competitively priced, as I mentioned. So to be honest, the only thing I was disappointed about was the lack of the zoom range in the focus assist mode when manually focusing. Now, most people would hardly ever manually focus this camera and these lenses unless you're doing something special and specific. But for me, shooting nightscapes, as you guys know, you have to rely on that feature a lot. Yeah, look, I know you can use focus peaking, and to be fair, the screen is really bright, so it is a lot easier to actually see the stars to focus on. So look, maybe it's just a compromise I can learn to live with. Anyway, so there you have it. I bought the Sony A7S3 for its video performance, and even though my bank balance is in severe dehydration, I can tell you, I made the right move on that front. I think it's an added bonus that it can take wonderful stills as well. So have I moved to the dark side? Am I a traitor to the loyal Nikon fanboys? No way. I'll be shooting Nikon cameras for a long time yet. I mean, who knows? I may even go further to the dark side and try out a Canon mirrorless one day. I mean, you just never know. You'll have to wait and see about that one, I suppose. Anyway, I'm pleased you made it this far, and I'm always happy to chat further in the comments section down below. And don't forget to give us a like and maybe subscribe to the channel if you feel led to do so. I've got heaps more Nightscape material coming your way in the future, and I'll look forward to seeing you guys then. So have a fantastic week. Take care. See you later.